So just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. And with that, thank you, Rachel. So maybe really quickly, if we can just do from the city side, quick introductions so you know who's on the call here. My name is Scott McCall. I'm the city manager here at Sammamish, and I've been the permanent city manager since beginning of the year. And maybe I'll kick it over to Rachel.
Good evening, everybody. Rachel Bianchi. I'm the deputy city manager, and I'm I don't know, beginning month 2 here. So pleased to be here.
Thank you, Rachel, and Aaron, if you would.
I'm Aaron Anton. I'm the finance director at the city here. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your evening to meet with us. Much appreciated.
All right. Well, with that, appreciate everyone jumping on. We wanted to offer you the opportunity to get sort of a one-on-one on both city government and how the city is funded, and then offer you the opportunity to ask questions as we go through this. And we point things out if there's things that don't make sense or you want a little bit further, please feel free. Since we are recording this, we'll go through, and any questions that I don't have or we don't have specifics to in the moment, we can add those to the candidate information page Q&A section so that everybody gets the response and it's accessible for everyone. So before we start, oh, thank you, Rachel. Sorry, I was jumping ahead. Before we start, are there any other questions before we get rolling? I would ask if you have a question during the presentation, I would ask if you just use your hand raise, and I'll ask Rachel and Aaron to help me out by identifying if I miss it. So as Rachel helped me out with, it's on our candidate resources page on the city website. It has a bunch of resources and then the Q&A for questions that have already been submitted by candidates for everyone to see what the answers are. And there's also, if you haven't seen it already, there's information about yard signs and use of city facilities and parks and things like that on there as guidance for your candidacy. All right, so we're going to start with the overview of how our government works. So for background, we are relatively a young city. So we incorporated in 1999. We are a year away from our 25th. We can't decide here to whether to call it a birthday or an anniversary. So we're calling it a birth-iversary. And next year will be our 25th. I've jokingly told my kids that that means that the city can now legally rent a car. So that's very exciting to be able to do that. But we're excited about coming up on our 25th year as a city. During that time, the city has grown quite a bit from its early stages. We now have 146.5 budgeted positions. Not all those positions are filled at the moment. I think we currently have 7 or 8 that are unfilled. We serve a population of over 668,000. That makes us a fairly large city population-wise in King County. And then our form of government is council manager. So and then what's our community like? You all are, I'm sure, have some sense of this, but this I always find this fascinating to see that we are very highly educated as a population. We are super family oriented. That should come as no surprise. We are increasingly diverse, including residents that were born outside of the US. And believe it or not, we have the highest household median income in the country. That's not county, that's country for our city. So that means that, we have, that goes with highly educated folks. So neither of those things I think are a surprise. I think what the surprise is how high that median household income is. I was a little surprised by that. And then, so what do we do? We provide a whole lot of infrastructure in the city. So some things you know about, some things you don't. 14 parks and open space sites There's a lovely picture of Sammamish Landing Park. We have 675 acres of parkland. A lot of that is passive. We have 20 miles of trails, and we have 23 facilities available for rent. And that would include things like picnic shelters and things like that on parks and facilities. For our streets, we have 210 miles of center lane miles. That means that there is a yellow line down the middle of some kind or another. We have 735 cul-de-sacs. That's right, you read that right, 735. We have 294 crosswalks, 500 plus streetlights, and 26 traffic signals. Interestingly, we own and maintain the traffic signals. We own a portion and maintain of the streetlights of those numbers. And then we have a robust stormwater program, 220 miles of pipe. We have 450 plus stormwater facilities. So that would include retention ponds all over the city. We have quite a few of those, and then some other stormwater facilities, 60 miles of ditches, a whole lot of storm drains, and actually 8 stormwater dams, believe it or not. They're sometimes called weirs as well, but dams that help regulate the storm flow in the city. So this is what our org chart looks like. In essence, the community members in the community elect the council. The council appoints advisory boards and commissions to advise them. The council hires the city manager, and then everybody else reports up to the city manager. And you can see there's a distinction between in-house services and contracted services. So for our contracted services, we have some big ones. Some of the biggest are our city attorney is contracted out. Eastside Fire and Rescue provides our fire and life safety support. Republic Services is our garbage waste hauler, and King County Sheriff's provides police services for us. And then we have some smaller contracts for municipal court, for prosecutor, public defender, for jail space, and related services like translation services and things like that for those that need it when they're as part of the court system. And then the services that we don't provide. And a lot of folks in the community get confused by this. We don't do the libraries. We don't provide the schools. We don't provide water and sewer. We have 2 different water and sewer utilities here in town. We do not provide electric and gas, and we don't provide internet or broadband. So all those are separate providers. So as I said previously, we operate under a council manager form of government. So that means in essence that the city council appoints a ceremonial mayor, and then the council hires a professional manager to carry out day-to-day. That's what they've tasked me to do. And then I technically manage all the city staff, but I don't have that many direct reports, but essentially everything rolls up through my office. And there's just a note on here that just parallels in essence what, if you're on the private side, what a CEO and a board of directors would look like. So the mayor the mayor serves a ceremonial role. The mayor chairs the council meetings. The mayor facilitates communication between members, which is really important as we get into some of these bigger pieces. The mayor represents the city in with other governments like the county council and the state legislature. And then the deputy mayor is there to perform duties in the mayor's absence. The mayor also does things like a lot of times community groups will ask if the mayor can attend their meeting, like I don't know, scout troop meetings, or sometimes school classes ask to have the mayor come in and speak to them. So that's also part of the role the mayor does. So what's the role of the council and mayor? They set policy. And what do we mean by that? We mean that they establish our goals and policies. They serve as leaders of the board. They listen to the constituents and try to represent their constituents when they come to the dais. They are required to adopt a balanced budget and a tax rate. We'll get in more of that when we get to the Finance 101. They adopt ordinances and resolutions that set policy. They supervise my performance. But one thing I want to be clear about, the one council member alone doesn't get to direct staff work. That requires a council majority. So, you know, the saying goes 4 votes makes policy, and that's constitutes a council majority. So that's the council and mayor role. And then, so to help put things in context, wanted to offer this up for everyone. And we used this with our last council retreat when we were talking about establishing council goals to try to help center council on where the decision points are, where council really gets to weigh in, and thought this was a really great analogy about a airplane. And so purpose and vision, you'll see down at the bottom, you'll see the council responsibilities in green, staff responsibility is in the clear or the white. So the closer we get to day, the less of a role there is for council. And this is just a way to put that into a picture context to help orient about when the decisions are made, about what level they're made at from a council perspective. And then the role of city manager. So my role is to carry out council's direction. I am bound by the actions of the council. I provide, or we provide, professional recommendations to council in an objective manner. I serve as council's chief advisor. I implement their policy. I handle all the administrative duties, and then I'm responsible for hiring, managing, and overseeing all components of staff, including human resources and benefits and all that kind of stuff. And then technically, I'm responsible for preparing a budget for council review, although all of these things take all of our staff to do them. It just rolls up through me, and it's technically my responsibility. And then what's the role of our staff? So the deputy city manager is here to serve in my absence and provide support to all departments. The directors are hired by the city manager to oversee specific departments. And then they implement policy direction of council and perform the operational function of the city. And as of a couple of years ago, we have our first union in-house. About 70% of our staff is unionized. And we are in process at the moment of starting to reopen our first contract and renegotiate the next contract with our union partners. So they are a strong partner in how we provide service in the city. All right, so where does all this policy come from? And those of you on boards and commissions at the moment, well, this will look very familiar, but the comprehensive plan is what drives all the rest of what we do. And this is a broad policy document that we've been working on for very frantically for the last year, and we'll have more to go. You all will be familiar with that for the most part. And the planning timeline is 20 years. So we're looking out, the comp plan will be completed in 2024. So we're looking out at 2044 for a 20-year planning horizon. So once the comprehensive plan is completed, those components, we would see implementation through our Sammamish Municipal Code. We'll be updating the code as a result. It will drive our 6-year capital plans. So there will be 20-year plans, and we will take 6 years worth and pull that out and start to work on the first 6. And then every subsequent year, we will update those plans accordingly. And then it also drives our budget for 23 and 24. So any questions about that piece of it at the moment?
If we wanted to learn more about comprehensive plan, where can we go and see?
So on our website, there is a whole comprehensive plan. There is a robust page with many links to other robust pages. So the comprehensive plan is built up of they're called elements, but they're in essence, they're chapters, and they're centered around big topics like transportation, housing. Now we have, as of this comprehensive plan, a climate action piece. And so each of those has their own page because these are all complicated components. But you can find those on the city website.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. Good question. All right. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to talk about council meetings.
Thanks, Scott. And please, jump in if there's questions on any of this as we go forward. So some resources available to council members. I think critical foundational one for the Sammamish City Council is the council rules of procedures that the council adopted. These do help the meetings run smoothly. Everyone's following the same format. The council does periodically review and revise as needed. This is an important document that is referenced throughout the year. And the rules are linked to this, which I think Scott said earlier, we will go ahead and post this on that candidate website that we showed you in the beginning so that you'll be able to link to it if you haven't seen it already. I think many of us have heard about Robert's Rules of Order. They're parliamentary procedures that really just help make a meeting go easier. You may have a contentious topic, you may have a lot of people. It just allows one topic at a time, one voice at a time. I just want to also reassure anybody who feels that it's a bit daunting, because I think it can be in the beginning if you haven't sort of exercised that muscle. The city does provide training for council members on Robert's rules. So we're going to talk about a couple of pretty important topics here. The first one being the Open Public Meetings Act. Washington State has a pretty strong sunshine law, which means that what we do in public government is we do it in front of our constituents. And so a meeting under OPMA, you'll hear us use that a lot, so we'll get you in the lingo now, right? Under OPMA, a meeting, first of all, is very broad. We'll get to that in a second. But it's really anytime you have a quorum, which because we have a 7-member council, that's 4 or more. Anytime that 4 or more are transacting city business in any way, right, that requires an open public meeting to do. And so that doesn't just mean a traditional meeting as you and I think of it. It means emails, it means live social media events, all of that sort of thing. So OPMA is a very significant state law that not just us, but all governments must work under. The other thing I think is really important for everybody to understand is it's not just the city council. It also applies to other city meetings such as boards, commissions, if we create an ad hoc task force, that sort of thing. So I know that's super quick on OPMA. The council does also get more in-depth training on OPMA, but if there's questions, we're happy to go in a little deeper. There are not yet. So let's go on to the other key sunshine law that we as public servants fall under, which is the Public Records Act. A public record is any document in any format related to city business. So if a council member gets a complaint over social media just from a neighbor venting that their recycle didn't get picked up that day, that's actually a public record. So it's important to really understand that any city business, there are limited exemptions, but I'm going to tell you now they are very few and far between, really mostly deal with litigation. So anything that has to do with embarrassment or something that we just don't want out there, that is not an allowable exemption. So as a part of the Public Records Act, we do have a records retention schedule, and the city is compliant with that. We have a whole process on how we retain our records and legally destroy records as the retention schedules allow. And then the other key thing is that this applies to city-owned and privately owned communication devices. So again, this is city-owned computers, this is personal cell phones, personal computers, that whole thing. And the city has developed a robust both policy and process to assist council members in compliance with the PRA. I see a question up there. Carrie, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but I was wondering if you could just cover one example. So a council member could call or text another, and that would be a one-to-one. It would be under the 4. But if they were talking about city business, would they then need to, send that information in if it was not on the city device?
That's a great question. So there's think of the OPMA, the Open Public Meetings Act, and the Public Records Act as sort of 2 legs of the sunshine stool, basically, right? So any communication that a council member has about city business is subject to the Public Records Act. So that means if we, let's go back to my recycling example that I used, right? So let's say we received a public records request that said, give me all of the complaints about missed recycle pickups in 2023, right? That text, let's say from neighbor to council member neighbor, would then need to be disclosed. And so then council members, we go through a process whereby we say, this public records request came in, you need to go ahead and look through your records and provide us that information. Now, again, the city has set up more of a process so that council members real time can say, oh, I got this text on my personal device. I'm going to go ahead and just put it in a folder so that it's there if there is ever a public records request for such a document. Does that help? Other questions on either public records or OPMA? Again, council members received more training on this. You are getting the really high level look at this, but council members do receive significant more training on both OPMA and PRA because they are so vital to public government in Washington State. I'm going to go back, but I'm going to go forward, but we can always come back if questions percolate here. So types of council meetings. Regular meetings are on the 1st and 3rd Tuesday. That's regularly scheduled business, and that's when the council may take formal action. Formal action means a vote, right? That's what that means. A study session are on the 2nd Tuesday of the month, and those are opportunities for council to dig deeper into specific topics. Council members usually do not take formal action on study session unless we hold a special meeting, which is that 3rd one, right? And so special meetings can be called at any time or date or place that is not on the established schedule. There is a noticing required that the city clerk's office does. So special meetings are noticed in advance. Again, back to the Open Public Meeting Act and that sunshine law that is so critical here in Washington. So the council also has what are called executive and confidential sessions. These are very limited and they allow the city council to meet privately during either a regular or special meeting to discuss certain topics. So Scott mentioned earlier that 70% of our workforce is unionized and that we are coming up on contract negotiations. Confidential sessions are allowed by state law in order for the city to protect its bargaining position when they are going through contract negotiations with labor partners. So that's what a confidential session is. An executive session, again, very limited. You'll see the RCW that allows the topics that you can go into executive session about. These, again, if you think of them, it's all about protecting the city's bargaining position. So if we were to purchase or sell a piece of property, right, you're going to want to be able to have protected conversations about price so that it doesn't fluctuate. Similarly, if you are going for potential litigation issues, you want to protect the city's position on litigation. And then the other opportunity it does is for the city managers in performance and of hiring the city manager to have some confidential conversations. Critical to executive sessions and, legally required for everybody who participates in an executive session is that any discussion in executive session must be kept confidential. And in an executive session, no action is taken. So if we take the real estate acquisition example, there will be a discussion in executive session, but there will not be a vote in executive session. The council comes out and then takes a public vote. Does that make sense? Got a couple nods there. Okay, so responsibilities of a council member. It is not just the 3 meetings, and I will say plus a month, right? Preparing for meetings includes reading the agenda packet, asking staff questions in advance of the meeting. One critical thing is engaging in regional boards and committees. I will say that any city always benefits from having council members participate in regional boards and committees. What could these be? We mentioned earlier that we are a member of Eastside Fire and Rescue, right? So serving on that board is one option. The Sound Cities Association has what's called the Public Interest Committee. That's another option. There are literally hundreds of different boards and committees seats for suburban city members to be on, and Sammamish benefits from having a voice at those tables. So I just strongly recommend those. The other thing is, you all know, is being active members of the community is just being out there, right? So attending community and regional events. Of course, as an elected official, lots of constituent phone calls, emails, and other communications. Scott can attest that there are regular meetings with the city council that he has on a regular basis. And then I think many of you know that the city of Sammamish does a coffee with the council, which is a rotating one Saturday morning a month that rotates across the city council members. Any questions about any of those? Natural breaking point, or we can just go with questions, or we can go on to Aaron. All right.
Appears we're good to go to Aaron.
I guess so.
All right, let's go ahead and go through the City Finances 101. So this is a brief high-level overview of our city finances. So starting off with some of the basics of our budget, the budget that we have at the city is a biennial or 2-year budget. So 2023-2024, you'll see that nomenclature regularly referred to, and that's because it is a 2-year budget that is adopted. The budget contains both operating and capital funds, and we'll talk about those specifics a little bit more. One thing to note as well is the budget is the plan, and that's similar to a private sector that has a budgeting plan, but in the public sector, it's also the law. So the budget is passed in the form of an ordinance, so it becomes a local law, those expenditure constraints and limits. The budget must also meet state requirements. So the state places certain requirements on our budgeting process as well as the budget itself, and they also require a balanced budget. So that's part of the state requirements that we need to adhere to. For the Sammamish standard, we have a standard of excellence here where we have GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association. It's the national body that we produce our documents and submit to for criteria, peer review criteria that we have to meet in order to receive awards. So it's a national award-winning budget document as well as our financial reporting documents. We do have budget and briefs and other reporting documents available on the website, and we'll show you that website link a little further on. Another thing to note about the budget is it does express our priorities and our values. So it's a reflection of that as we go through. So quickly, just looking at where the budget timeline fits into the overall picture. So timing wise, although we're at a 23-24 budget and we adopt those budgets in 2-year increments, they're part of a 6-year capital plan. So a 6-year capital plan for each of our areas gets adopted as well, and that leads into that 20-year comprehensive plan. So you can see that there's larger planning time horizons and narrower ones, and the budget is involved in that, setting those 2-year appropriations as we move along these plans over time. So a brief timeline on what's happening now related to the budget process. We have the mid-biennial budget adjustment process that's going on. So the council did adopt the 23-24 budget. It's currently in place. And then that there's a required review after 9 months. And so that process of reviewing and then potentially amending the budget and bringing forth a modification is what the process is that we're on right now. So you can see this gives you kind of a brief outline of the timeline. So the first part of the year, there's that review of the budget, and we're monitoring towards what actual performance occurs to the budgeted amounts. And then as we complete that review over the summer, there's a city manager review of that information that is requiring adjustments. And then that moves forward into the November time and December timeframe, where there's public hearings on any amendments that need to be made to the budget. And then in November as well, there is that is the deadline for passing an ordinance establishing the next year's property tax levy. So that is all part of that November and December timeframe for adoption. So just in general terms, the general fund itself is the main operating fund of the city. So you'll hear a lot of discussion about the general fund because it encompasses most of the activities of the city. There are other fund types. The capital funds there's 3 different capital funds that the city has. So these are for restricted capital revenues, is where those are housed, as well as capital costs. And those are the general capital, parks capital, and transportation capital. There's also a category of funds called the proprietary funds, and those are the utilities funds. So it's the surface water utility for Sammamish, and that has both an operating and capital piece that are part of surface water. The revenue source there is surface water rates. And then the last category of funds is the internal service funds. And so these are the funds that support the other funds within the city. So items, we have 3 internal service funds, the equipment. So when we're reserving to replace equipment, that's in the equipment reserve fund, the information technology fund, and then the risk management fund. So in the risk management, that's the city's liability insurance policy is contained in that internal service fund. So those are the general categories of funds, and we're going to focus more on the general fund, which is the larger piece. So if we take a look just at the general fund, from the revenue side, it's the sources to the general fund we take a look at, and you can see this chart peels out the different sources to the general fund. In total, it's showing, of course, a 2-year look because our budget's on a 2-year basis. So in total for 23-24, 115 million is the forecasted sources that will come into the city, and this depicts the different types of sources that we're expecting. So you'll note that property tax is the largest source by far. 68.3 million over that 2-year period is forecasted in property tax. An additional note on property tax is that's also limited by the state for a 1% increase. So we'll come back to that in a little bit. Let's go on to uses is our next slide. So using the same graphic where we just broken down into the types of uses or expenses that those sources are used for, and these are the different areas that you can see, the largely departments that are associated with the different service types in these different areas. So some things to point out here, obviously the larger police and fire contain 18.7 million. That's a contract with Eastside Fire and Rescue. Scott briefly mentioned differences between contracts and the in-house services. Police is the other large contract with the King County Sheriff's Office. That's the 21.8 million. So those two together, almost 40 million of the usage category over the 2-year period. So in total, uses add up to 120 million. This is a budgeted amount. So recall that we do conservatively budget because that's it is also the law. So actuals can and do trend lower than the budgeted amounts. And that's why we like to pay particular attention to the budget monitoring reports as we're going through the year, because we want to track and make sure that we're on track with those expectations. So as part of our another activity that's going on is the financial sustainability plan work. So we were talking about the 2-year budget that leads into the work that's simultaneously going on the overall financial sustainability plan for the city. And this in particular gets at that notion, the structural piece of the 1% lid on property tax. So you recall from that sources slide that not only is property tax the largest source of the city, it's also limited by the state to 1% growth per year. And so that compares to expenses that are growing at a greater rate than 1% year over year. So that's what we're referring to as the structural imbalance that exists. And over time, of course, that's a factor that you can see in the graph there that would eat into fund balance over time. And so that's what the financial sustainability plan is focused on, addressing that structural gap and coming up with strategies to do so in a time period before we cross over and run out of the fund balance. So the fund balance is needed to sustain operations. That's the other piece of this. Some notes just on the task force itself. There's a city manager task force that has been put together, and they're actually having their 4th meeting coming up here. And they're set to look at different strategies to form the recommendation on financial sustainability plan and to make that recommendation to City Council on September 19th. So that's the timeline for that work and coming forward to intersect with Council. An additional note on budget reporting and information. So I know there was an earlier question on where can I get more? If you are like me and you want more budget information, it is available online. So we have on our website, there's a lot more reports for you. So annual reports are there. We do budget monitoring reports quarterly. So you'll see the quarterly progress of actuals to budget as we go throughout the year. So in 2023, the first quarter and second quarter reports are already on the website. Third quarter obviously would be September. So that report would be posted shortly after September closes. So in October sometime would be the next quarterly report that would come up. There's also historical and trend data there. Sometimes we get inquiries on, how's it looking for sales tax, for example, receipts over time, and how's it compared to last year or the year before. So any of those trending data and information is also available on the website at that link. Right, so that's going back to you, Scott, there.
Sure. So thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Rachel. We just tossed a whole lot of information at you. There will be a quiz. So get your number 2 pencils out. Now, I just want to say we tossed a lot of information at you, and you might think of something later tonight or in the next couple of days. Please use the candidate website submittal form to send your questions in. And we're happy to answer those and put them back out on the candidate page so everybody sees the question and the answer so that everyone gets that at the same time. At this moment, I'd like to open it up and see, are there any other, based on sort of the broad scope of things, or other questions that you might have since we're all here, and to offer answers if we can. Oma.
Yeah, 2 questions. One is, where can I see this slideshow because this is amazing. This was fantastic. Great work you guys have done. I could see that a lot of information you have to cover at the same time. Make sure we all understood what you're saying. So it was fantastic. Thank you so much first. So where can we see this slideshow? That's one question. And the second one is about community development. I just wanted to know what that expense is. Yeah, like what kind of expense goes into community development. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for the questions. To answer your first question, we will be posting the presentation on the candidate information page tomorrow. So both the recording of the presentation and the slideshow itself will be on the candidate page tomorrow. So you'll be able to access it then. And then to answer your question about community development, there are three main pieces to community development. And the first part is they do our planning, our long range planning, our what needs to happen in the future. They do our permit review. So when you come in and you want to apply for a permit, they're the ones that you would talk to make sure that you're meeting all the codes and all the requirements for permitting. And they also do what's called development review. So when you're in process, they will make sure that all of what you're doing meets our codes. So those are sort of the three main pieces of community development. And one other key important piece, they do inspections and they do code compliance. So all those pieces are within community development.
Okay. If you don't mind, if you go to that particular slide, it says 12 million. That's how much we spend to do all that. That's wow. Yeah, I was just wondering because the admin also 12 million. That means, what I'm saying.
Sorry, Scott. I was just gonna say, I think that's a good reminder that city services are provided by people, right?
Yeah.
And people are expensive, and that's what the good chunk of a city budget is paying the people to deliver those services to our community.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Carrie.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Just have a few questions. I know that the task force is currently in progress, but are there any revenue opportunities that are bubbling up to the top as things that are looking promising?
Well, this is the actual discussion they're going to be having on Thursday night. So if you want to come join us in person, we'll be at City Hall. You can listen into their deliberation. I think there are some tools that the city has not utilized previously that I think are under consideration, along with a number of other things. But one of those would be a transportation benefit district, which is car vehicle tabs to be used for transportation related purposes. And the other piece is a utility tax. So just very high level. I think those two pieces are two of the major tools that are available to the city that the city has not chosen to utilize to date.
Okay, thank you. I was looking at the budget and briefs from the previous to this year and kind of noticed that the budget and brief, the expenditures went up a lot. Is that
Sure.
due to inflation or projects? I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yes, to all of the above. Inflation last year went up 10, or was it 10.2%?
Yeah, 10.1% for CPIU and 9.2 for CPIW. So you had really high economic inflation numbers last year. Yeah.
And Carrie, just to put a finer point on that, I think police and fire are our biggest line items, and and we're not in control of the cost increases that go. They are locked into contracts with their labor groups, and so their increases are somewhat locked in by their labor contracts. as they are primarily labor cost organizations. So when we see increases, those increases in inflation, that's across the board. That we saw that in small contracts like fence repair, to maintenance contracts, to construction related contracts. Everything went up accordingly and then some, except for our ability to raise revenue.
Got it. All right. As I've been watching some of the meetings, sometimes, our city council gets asked sort of on the fly, or things come up where there's a desire to increase certain expenditures. Like, for example, a couple months ago, the Human Services was pitching the funds to be dispersed to the various nonprofits. And, as the discussion was going, everyone was kind of feeling like maybe we can make this a little bit bigger to make a bigger impact. Or another example is a few weeks ago with the overage on the Kokanee work group. And so I was just curious, what's the best way for council to follow along to on the fly be able to answer, can we spend 10K here, or 50,000 more here, just in a meeting?
Well, that's an interesting question, Carrie. I think that's at the end of the day, I'll give you my opinion as the city manager sitting at the dais with them. Is it's always prudent for us to go back and review where we are with our other budgets and remember that the budget has already been adopted and we are implementing it. So anytime they start talking about, well, can we just pull 10,000 from here or there? Well, we have the whole budget assigned out. So if there's going to be an increase, we need to know where the revenue is coming from for that increased cost. And so sometimes we will have money set aside because we're anticipating it, and sometimes we won't. And that's a conversation that we have at the dais. It generally requires direction to me to go and look and to figure out what's available and to come back and report back to the council with is, if we were to do that, what are the options to do that?
Okay, so they could decide in an evening, yes, let's do it, but you would need to look, and then perhaps that would come back.
Well, I would call it a qualified, I will need to go back and check and see, because generally we don't have that kind of information just sitting in front of us.
Oh, right. But they would kind
And
of be like, they give you the thumbs up, but then you would go look.
yeah, it'd be more, if it's direction from the majority of the council, then yeah, we take that direction and then go act on it and come back and say yes, or it's, we don't have it and you need to do something different in order to achieve that goal.
Great. And I have one more question before I'll
Sure.
open it back for others. Whenever internal transfers are talked about, it's always kind of confusing, although I appreciate, Aaron, you gave some insight on that slide for the risk equipment where, they don't get their own budget, I guess, but they get transfers. Is that kind of as needed? And then it comes from like the general fund?
Right. It actually comes from all the other funds. So those funds feed the risk management fund. So it's an internal service fund. So its only revenue source is internal to the city. There's no external revenue source that's funding those expenses. So they're housed and they support just the internal service fund. So stormwater, the proprietary fund, the capital funds, the operating funds can all feed those internal service funds.
Okay. And is that budgeted or ad hoc or both?
It is budgeted. So all of those are based off of the actual. So in the case of the risk management fund, it's our liability insurance policy. So when those premiums get set, that amount then is collected based off of the portions that are for each of those funds internal to the city. So they each pay a piece of that overall liability policy cost for the city.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the questions, Carrie. I know the budget is not intrinsic, and government budgeting is very specific, and it is not necessarily just look at it and it makes perfect sense. There's very specific accounting rules that we have to follow, and sometimes they make it. we try collectively to say, how do we make it the most like your own personal budget to make it, sort of apples to apples. And so it'd be essentially saying, if you had like a fund set aside for your homeowner's insurance, then you'd say, well, okay, so I need to put money from my checking or savings account into that fund to be able to cover my homeowner's insurance. That's in essence an internal transfer. Because there's no money coming directly into your homeowner's insurance fund. Other questions from anyone else? Thank you, Carrie, for those great questions, and thank you, Uma, as well.
Welcome. That's it. I think you
Well,
guys did a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know, again, we fed you a whole lot of information, so we'll get those up tomorrow, and you can take a look at the slide deck, and if other questions come up, please share them out. I'm sure this is what I share with council members a lot when I talk to them, is that if you have a question, in all likelihood, one of your colleagues will have the same or something very similar to that question. So it's always helpful to be able to get the question and then be able to share out both the question and the answer so that everyone gets the same understanding. So I encourage you to continue to send those in. We've had some good questions put in already this candidate season, and we're always up for more. So please feel free. Yeah, Sid.
So you mentioned, like a single council member doesn't direct staff action, but in preparing for meetings, when you are asking staff, is it preferred that council members go through you as the city manager, or is it preferred that they go directly to, the department members that would, relevant to whatever the business is?
Yeah, great question, Sid, and I appreciate that. I asked them to send it through me so I can keep track of what's been asked. And it's also to be able to manage staff time about when they have availability to respond to the question. I will, just share with all of you, as you might expect, if a council member asks a question, they're generally going to drop everything else and just work on that response. And sometimes the council member doesn't need an answer right away. They just wanted to get the question out. So if it runs through me, then I get to say, hey, do you need this right away? And then I can then help the staff accommodate their schedules and say, when do you think you might be able to get to this? If it's necessary right away, then we'll make it happen right away. If we have a little bit of time, then that's always helpful for managing workload.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Carrie.
Sort of related to that, who creates the meeting agendas? How does that get like content and is that more staff driven, or can council get potentially topics on the agenda if needed?
Yeah, good question. So in general, broadly, staff is developing the main parts of the agenda because we know when things need to come to council to get direction or approval in order to make sure that we are continuing to progress in whatever the project is. However, council members can always, it's in our council rules that council members can put a request in through the mayor or put in a request if I can't remember off the top of my head. It's either 2 or 3 council members request something added to the agenda, then we add that. We just with the caveat that if generally we try to do a staff agenda bill with every agenda item, and if we don't have enough time, sometimes things get added on. I see Pam's hand up there, and she can probably clarify for me, but there's a way for council members to add things to the agenda, but we like to have enough time to be able to do a staff report that goes with that to give it context for those that aren't on council. So for our general, the residents to be able to understand what decision point is.
Thank you. And I have another question. So if that's the case, how and council is there to listen to the community, how is what is the best way to take input on various subjects and get that incorporated into projects or plans or just documented? Like, where do you park some of that feedback?
Sure. Well, there's a number of ways that comes in, as you might expect. Sometimes we get public comment either verbally or in writing. Sometimes, for instance, at the Coffee with Councils, people will come to council members with an issue and then they'll follow up with me, and then we'll go and take a look at that issue. And if there's something to address, then we can follow up on that. Council members send questions in all the time about either projects that are going on or things that we might want to look at in the future. We try to take all that in and keep track of it, and as things, if they're for a specific project or in a department area, I'll always forward that along to that relevant department, and then they can take that information and incorporate it into what they're doing. So there's all kinds of council input that goes on. It's a lot of it is more informal, and then the formal parts are when we come to the dais and we're looking for formal direction from council, and that's when council sets policy directions by taking, even if it's an advisory vote or a directional vote. Once they take a vote, then that sets our policy unless they go back and change it again. Believe me, once you get a council email address, people will find you and they will provide you lots of things for you to contemplate about, things that you want to wade in on and get involved in. So. Pam, I saw your hand up and then I saw it drop down. Did you want to jump in?
Oh, I just put 3 in the chat. I didn't actually.
Oh,
raise my
okay.
hand. It's 3
Okay,
council members.
sorry.
That's all.
3 council members. See, I knew Pam would know. Yeah. So that was about how many council members it takes to add an agenda item. So, and those are in the council rules. Council rules are set by council, and like it was in the presentation earlier, that governs the way council interacts with each other. Generally, every 2 years with the election, there will be a new vote for mayor and deputy mayor. And we generally revisit the council rules at that point in time for the newly seated council to see if they like where everything is or if they want to change something. That's sort of, we're trying to get back to that common practice. That's kind of the right cycle for it. And then they can always be amended as needed. Other questions for the group while you have us here? These have been great questions so far. Really appreciate the engagement. Again, a lot of information in there, so don't have to think of all of it right now. All right. Well, if there's nothing else for tonight, I want to say thank you all so much for joining us. Hopefully you found it helpful. And again, we will get these up on the website tomorrow. And then if there are follow-up questions, please continue to send those in and we will get those out on the candidate page as soon as we can get them answered and turn around. All right. Well, with that, thank you all so much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.